Thanks very much, Mr. Bowen. In your evidence just recently, you talked about some of the lessons from the GFC. And if I heard you correctly, you talked about one of the key lessons was it was important for nations to have fiscal space to deal with unforeseen consequences. In your assessment, or the assessment of the PBO, is there enough fiscal space in the current budget to deal with any externalities that might present themselves?
Well, Senator, I don't think it's a matter for me to make that judgment. Perhaps what I would say is that Australia was in a fortunate position compared to many other countries at the outbreak of the global financial crisis, in that at that time it had, it's a funny way to put it, but negative net debt. So, and that did, along with scope for monetary policy as well, but did give the Australian government fiscal space to act, to stimulate the economy at a time when the judgment was that a stimulus was necessary. Of course, if there hadn't been that level of financial surplus, accumulated surplus, in place, then the net debt that we have today, which is getting up towards $200 billion, I think, would be significantly higher because the government would have had to borrow more. So, in fact, just on rough figures that I had a look at earlier, it would be in excess of 20% higher, other things being equal, if all the same decisions had been made. Of course, that also then translates to the impact on recurrent expenses. And public debt interest costs today are around $8.5 billion a year and rising. If there had not been a financial surplus prior to the global financial crisis, then today, presumably, there would be a similar increase in public debt interest payments that would have to be made. So these things, debt does, we have to remember, debt does impact on recurrent costs. It's not that debt is good or bad, but it has to be serviced. It has to be serviced. Yeah.
When we look through the 10 drivers that the PBO has identified in the Australian Government Spending Historical Trends paper, it looks to me as if at least 4 or 5 of those are heavily influenced by the ageing of the Australian population. And I'm just wondering how critical is that changing demographic to the future fiscal position of the government, and to what extent does government have an ability to control such a big change in our demographics?
Senator, I think the answer to that question probably lies in the intergenerational report, and I know there will be an update of that coming out at some time, but the latest report showed quite clearly that the ageing of the population, would have a major increase, a major impact on the fiscal sustainability. We are seeing it impacting in the areas of the age pension and aged care, obviously, but also healthcare, where expenditure is growing significantly faster than the real economy. So I won't comment too much on this. I think it's an area that Treasury may well be able to comment on, more so than I can today, but it is clearly a fundamental shift, in a structural shift, that will have to be addressed one way or another.
David, yeah.